It is Friday, December 19th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another Platinum episode of LTPS, and that is the big news. 30 Platinums Part 4 is almost done. It's scheduled for this Tuesday. And I really hope I get it done in time, so that's the plan. That's why I skipped editing the TGA reactions. I skipped a Tuesday video, because I'm just trying to really grind this out and get it done so it's out before the end of the year. But it's turning out really well. I hope you all enjoy it. I should also note that for any supporters on Patreon or YouTube, the big cut will be available day one as well, so that's not going to be after. You can just watch that one right away. That's the plan, at least. So there's going to be a main cut, about an hour and a half, 2 hours, definitely bigger than the last one. And then the extended version will be probably 4-something hours, close to that. So I hope it turns out okay. Any support gets you access to the big one, and then afterwards we'll do a director's cut, behind the scenes, bloopers, probably a handful of things otherwise, but any support, of course, really helps those videos out because it's a massive undertaking, to get those things out. So very happy to finally have Part 4 almost done. That is this Tuesday, hopefully. Follow on Twitter otherwise, and I'll keep you updated on when it will be available. With that said, though, let's move on to our PS Plus reminder. The December PS Plus Essential lineup is still live on PSN. Make sure you claim those games. And also the December PS Plus Extra and Premium lineup is now live on PSN, and that means we have some games that will exit the game catalog in over a month's time because the next expiration date is January 20th. So you do have a lot of time left to play these 4 games, which is Like a Dragon, The Man Who Erased His Name, SD Gundam Battle Alliance, Sayonara Wild Hearts, and Monopoly Plus. So not too bad, not a ton of games leaving, but if you want to play those, get your time in on them. All right, moving on to our first news story. We have some bad news for the PlayStation Store on PS3 and Vita in Bulgaria because beginning January 1st, the currency in Bulgaria is changing from the lev to the euro, and so it's a very similar case to what happened with the Croatia PS Store on PS3 and Vita, and that they shut the stores down because they did not change over the currency properly. So Sony did outline that they will be changing over the currency on January 16th for modern platforms if you have any sort of wallet balance there, but for PS3 and Vita, which are legacy stores, they will shut those down, and that's unfortunate because it's a very circumstantial thing. We know Sony attempted to shut down the store back in 2021, and that's been the miraculous thing, is that it's going on 5 years now at this point, nearly 5 years, that the store has still been operating from the reversal change. So credit where it's due. I mean, it has still been working, and that's excellent, but it sucks that it's so circumstantial in that when something like a currency change, you don't expect that to happen ever, or certainly not often. That's where the resources to convert the older stores probably is not even remotely worth it, and that is the fair pass Sony has in this case to say, yeah, we're just going to shut those stores down. I don't like it, but I can see why that happens the way that it does for these cases in particular. Moving on to some PlayStation Studio news, we have another leadership shakeup going on, this time at Sucker Punch Productions, where the long-standing Sucker Punch vet, Brian Fleming, of nearly 30 years, will be leaving January 1st. Confirmed via SIE, he'll be passing down the torch to the long-standing technical and creative leads, Jason Cannell and Adrian Bentley, and they will be the new studio heads. And Nate Fox is not going anywhere. He's staying on as a co-creative director. So Brian has been instrumental in Sucker Punch's success over the years. He's been a key pillar of that studio and the games they put out. And so it's one of those things that we often say with these big leadership changeovers. Typically, if it's 20, 30 years, you would think nothing untoward's going on here. Like these guys, after they do 20, 30 years, typically between big projects, big product launches, they want to move on to something else. And so I would think that's probably what's going on here. And so that's the thing about our industry. It's still fairly young. There hasn't been that much changeover, but that's why we're seeing a lot of it now as we have these big either consoles come out or games that take 6, 7 years to make. Even 5 years, doesn't matter, right? So I would think there's nothing really crazy going on here outside of Brian being ready to pass down the torch, and I think that would probably be a good time to do it. So congrats to Brian, and a new era of Sucker Punch does indeed begin. Next up, Naughty Dog's Intergalactic: The Heretic Prophet is probably behind schedule based on this new report from Jason Schreier writing for Bloomberg, where apparently Naughty Dog is ordering mandatory overtime from their employees, at least a minimum of 8 hours extra per week to work on a new demo for the game that is meant to be reviewed by SIE. And apparently the studio has been running late on production and already missing several deadlines. Based on the report, staff are being told not to do more than 60 hours a week, but 5 days a week in the office is expected compared to 3 days previously. And apparently this is the first time in recent years where overtime was mandated, but the game is currently planned for mid-2027, all based on people familiar with the studio, the situation, and the game's schedule. So you don't love hearing that, especially because Naughty Dog is well known for just that, crunch, the infamous industry crunch of working overtime on these games. And the thing about the crunch conversation is that there is a gray area as far as how that even happens at certain studios. It's all based on the culture that's fostered within the studio, and there's always that pressure of there are some folks that they don't like it and they want to go home, and there are others that genuinely do want to work that overtime, even if they're not forced to. And then that creates an uneven political environment in the workplace of, well, you don't want to be seen as an employee that's, not for the project. And if you want to chase promotions, you're probably not going to be looking good in the eyes of leadership when you choose to go home early and others are choosing to stay. I think we've all kind of been in that environment before, and that happens at creative studios like a Naughty Dog. In this case, it's mandatory overtime, and it doesn't really bode well for a game that's scheduled for mid-2027. Now, they do have the sort of saving grace here in that they've not confirmed anything for a release window. This is still technically a rumor, but I think it was kind of a safe expectation. The game was scheduled for somewhere in 2027. So you think, okay, mid-27, and they're already behind on multiple deadlines and milestone builds that SIE has to review. It just, you sort of wonder oh gosh, and you're already throwing labor at it, especially for a studio that has been known for this being a problem. So you don't love hearing any of this. It doesn't really instill any confidence in the game schedule. And that's not reflective of the game's quality itself. It's just a matter of this is definitely a game they've settled on. They think they've got something and they're planning to launch it, by mid-2027. But it doesn't sound like they're going to get there if they're already running into problems, and it's creating this mandatory environment of we need to work on this even more than we were before. And, we'll follow this story closely and see how it pans out. Moving on to what is probably going to be our conclusion to the Sony suing Tencent over the Horizon ripoff Light of Mataram game, because as I thought this would happen, I thought it would happen a lot sooner, but they are coming to some sort of undisclosed agreement and everything is being washed away. It's not going to court. So we had some filings submitted on Wednesday, and that did confirm that the proceedings are being dismissed due to an undisclosed agreement between Sony and Tencent, which in light of this news, immediately the Light of Mataram game was removed from Steam and the Epic Games Store. So Sony probably got the conclusion they wanted, which was, hey, you cannot release that game, it's infringing on our IP. Which they probably had a much better case with Horizon Steel Frontiers now being properly revealed, and maybe that was the Tencent lawyers going, ooh, okay, maybe we shouldn't fight this, because up to this point, they were going back and forth tooth and nail, right? That was the more surprising thing about it. Oh man, this thing's actually going to go to court. But no, we did get the eventual conclusion of they decided to settle. And so I would think, if anything, because we don't know the conditions of the deal, Tencent is probably not going to rest on that game. They're probably going to spend some time reskinning it, and we'll probably see it again in another 6 months to a year. I'm sure when it does get re-revealed, we'll know oh, that was that was Light of Mataram, and so now it looks completely different. Next up, there's been some heavy speculation over a recent PlayStation job posting that was discovered for an open-world game test analyst, which is basically quality assurance, so it's an entry-level job. But on that job posting in San Diego, the Scranton campus, it does say you will be primarily focusing on an open-world game with RPG and puzzle elements. So that has led some people to discuss what's going on with San Diego studio, primarily known for doing MLB. Oh, wait a minute, it could be that rumored new studio that they're forming in collaboration with Naughty Dog. Is this related to the Sean Escagee game? There's a lot going on there, but I do want to simmer that all down a little bit, because the particular area they're in, like, that's also PlayStation Studios Visual Arts, and that's their support arm, and they do a lot of quality assurance there for the vast majority of the first party and second party content. I think they do also handle outsourcing work as well, so third parties can contact them and they can do that stuff there too. So that's what that could very likely be, or rather that's what it is, but you can't really narrow that down, because Sony has a lot of open world games with RPG elements. So, there's not really much speculation we can do when we can't really narrow it down. PS Studios does a lot of Q&A there, so this could really be anything if you did hear about this recent job posting. Moving on to Ratchet & Clank Ranger Rumble, the mobile Ratchet & Clank game, which doesn't look half bad. Not the worst thing in the world. They are expanding that game, so recently confirmed they will be going to Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and Finland. So as a reminder, you can pre-register on their site, and that is a game that they are still doing very early testing, and there should be a global launch probably not too far away. It seems like they've got something that they're pretty happy with as they open up the game to more and more countries. So it's certainly a phased rollout, but I mean, this is a game that in theory could go somewhere. I mean, I tend to be optimistic, and I've actually heard from people playing the game like, no, like the loop works, like it's fun, it's Ratchet & Clank, It's just the weird thing is that, hey, it's a mobile game and there's no PS5 version. But if the game is successful, you can probably expect a PS5 one, which might make some people more happy, even if this is the direction you weren't really hoping a Ratchet & Clank game would be in 2025 and also 2026. Moving on to Marathon and Bungie, where Bungie has confirmed the game will launch March 2026. Not an exact date, but a release window of March next year, and it will cost $39.99 USD. So indeed, that more modest price premium title, and that price will entitle players to a roadmap of free updates as the years progress. Bungie also clarified that the reward pass will not expire any reward passes that they do. So you can buy and unlock any previous ones that are offered, so there's no pressure to buy right away and try to see everything as it comes out. Bungie also went on to highlight all the changes they've been making to the game since the alpha, which includes proximity chat, solo queuing, expanding the dark and gritty world, the dead runners drop as corpses and they decay over time, there's more customization options, they're enhancing the role audio plays in the game, and a few more. They released gameplay, just a smorgasbord of new things for Marathon as they get fairly close to launching this game, because they're now committing to, again, March 2026. And that's the thing. The feedback I keep hearing from anybody that's in the alpha, I actually signed up to try and get into a playtest just to see for myself, which I don't typically do, but, want to at least try some of these games when I'm talking about them. Compared to like Concord, for example, right? Didn't even try bothering to play that game, and now I can never play it. But the point is, it seems like people genuinely are enjoying the changes they've made. And so, it's really hard to look at an upcoming premium priced live service game and think, oh, that's going to be really big. But it would appear as though there's certainly some enthusiasm going into this, far more than the game initially did. Now, does that mean this game is going to succeed? Well, that remains to be seen, but we'll certainly be following that as the game gets closer to launch and the inevitable release as well. Now, another PS Studios live service game is Marvel Tokon, which is a 4v4 fighter, and so far there's only 8 fighters announced for the game, so people at this point, after various playtests, are wondering when they're going to show off more characters. So the game's producer, Takashi Yamanaka, did promise that more characters will be announced in this recent end-of-year message, and they did also say they're listening to and appreciating all the feedback they've gotten so far. Which, from the outside looking in, because as most of you know, not a fighting game person, I won't speak on this with any sort of meaningful authority, but it seems like a lot of people are now not really super jazzed on the game. Maybe it's just more pent-up demand for, seeing more of it, because there's only so much where you can keep having people play in the same environment, more or less. But I was asking Terrell about the game a while ago, like back when it was announced, right? And he said, I don't really know about the whole 4v4 thing, which that stuck out to me too. That seemed a little bit weird, and that I'm not even into the fighting game genre, right? So it seems like that's also a point of contention, is that still isn't really like a proven gameplay setup just yet. So again, can't really speak much else on it, but we'll still be following this PS Studios game as it builds up to its eventual launch. Moving on to the PS5 console exclusive, Phantom Blade Zero, which we now know the game is coming out September 9th, 2026. And we now also know that the agreement Sony has is for 1 year exclusive only on PlayStation 5 as a console, so it's on PS5 and PC, but the standard disclaimer is on the trailer now in plain view. It will not show up on other consoles until at least 12 months after release, which is a good reminder after the whole Black Myth Wukong thing that typically when Sony has timed exclusive agreements, it is usually outlined very clearly. There's usually some sort of broad stipulation, but it will either give a time frame or just say timed exclusive, not on other platforms, for some sort of undetermined amount of time, right? Sometimes they don't say the exact amount, but it does raise a very interesting angle for this game, in that means it won't show up on Xbox or Switch 2 until late 2027, so very far away. That, and also, if you remember a while ago, I had proposed the idea of like, well, I'm not sure how committed Sony's going to be to signing agreements like this when Xbox is in a very weird position and their next platform might just be a system that launches PC games. But then it's like, oh, wait a minute, Switch 2 is very competent hardware, and Sony in 2-something years might have their own portable, which now directly conflicts with that system, right? So in a weird way, I mean, Sony is probably just in a different perspective of still signing agreements and locking down timed exclusivity for games that can probably comfortably launch on Switch 2, whereas that wasn't really something they had to worry about too often with Switch 1. So the perspective changes there from Xbox to now Nintendo in locking down exclusive agreements. Moving on to another rumor for the rumored PlayStation 6 handheld and the low power mode, and Sony doing things on the back end to prepare for this handheld. So this rumor yet again comes from Tom over on their channel, Moore's Law is Dead, where based on one of their best sources, they mentioned that Sony recently patched all of their SDKs for PS5 game development back to 1.0 to support power saver mode, which they're currently on version 12 of the SDK. And they do mention that Sony did not even do this for PS5 Pro support, which I want to stop this right here and already explain that for those that might be uneasy on Tom as a source for these ongoing PlayStation 6 rumors, both PS6's SoC, this handheld SoC, you know, if you're uneasy about this, I can at least tell you that what he's saying now is accurate as far as how the SDK actually works on the back end for PlayStation systems. It's been like this since PlayStation 4, for example. This is partly why a lot of, early lifecycle PS4 games didn't get pro patches, because they might have been on a very early version of the SDK. To get a pro patch, you can't just use the existing SDK environment and that particular game. Like, the game has to be brought up every version of the SDK and be worked on from that point onward. So that's why there's many early PS4 games that never got pro patches. Some studios, they made those games, they put the dev kits down, moved on, sold them, got rid of them, closed like the source code and everything. It's too far gone, right? And that's the same environment for right now with PlayStation 5, and that some of those early PS5 games, if they're not actively being worked on, if those are like games that the studio has just put down and moved away from, they can't go back and just add a pro patch. That's just not how it works. You have to update the SDK to the latest version. So if they are indeed on 12.0, which is what retail hardware is on right now, then that sort of tracks as far as how the rumor sounds. So the implication here that Tom is making is that Sony is updating every version of the SDK. So no matter what, every developer, in theory, if they still have their SDKs, if they're still in a position where they want to go back to that game, they don't have to go through the hoops that the PS5 Pro patch would go through. They're this committed to making sure that a studio has the option to add a low power mode. Now, on the opposite end of this rumor, they also mention that one document explicitly states that for the CPU optimizations, they really are suggesting that the game only be runnable on 8 threads, and they even say, quote, new operation modes may be supported in the future, and applications may run in environments with different available CPU configurations, unquote. That's apparently exact verbiage from the developer documentation that appeared on the back end for studios. Of course, still all a rumor, just that in theory, the way that this sounds, it sounds believable. Now, having said that, I will also say, assuming that quote is legitimate, then that is a very big smoking gun, and that low power mode is already treated on the back end as a sort of third platform. In the dev environment for PlayStation 5, it's base PS5, PS5 Pro, and now a new console. It's the low power mode. It's a third performance profile. And so dev documentation is now allegedly saying that there may be other configurations, which would be a handheld machine that PlayStation is working on. So that it shows a certain level of commitment, assuming this is legitimate. And I would think Sony is fairly concerned with making sure that they have as much software playable as possible for native PS5 versions. So we'll leave the rumor there. I don't want to dwell too much longer on this, but just based on the framing of how Tom has worded this, it's legitimately how that does work on the back end. And if it's true, that is great news, but we do still need developers to actually start offering more low power modes, which that in itself is very public. And we know that there's not many of them. So right now, it's not boding too well. All right, let's get into some video game sales data, where we have some very big headlines that came out from this recent report from Circana, which tracks video game sales data here in the US. And so for the month of November, it was very, very bad. So while PlayStation 5 did lead the month in both unit and dollar sales, it was the worst November in the games industry since November 1995 in terms of unit sales. So between all manufacturers, only 1.6 million consoles were sold in the month. Now, hardware spending was down 27% year on year for a total of $695 million, and that's the worst since November 2005. And when you break it down individually, PS5 was down 40%, Switch 1 and 2 combined sold 10% less than Switch 1's November in 2024, and Xbox was down 70%. Which obviously Xbox we know has been doing terrible, so that's 2 years onward from 30% down, 30 something again percent down, and then another 70. PS5 has had a pretty normal decay curve, and in some scenarios actually did better than the previous quarter year on year. So the 40% there, I mean, context is everything obviously, so it's natural to expect that sales would be down. Switch 2 is certainly interesting because this is now the first time PS5 outsold Switch 2, and that's a new system going into its first holiday season. So that's pretty insane, actually. But, Switch 2 is also in a really weird spot where it's weird, but in a good way, because the console was very front-loaded. So it was the fastest selling console in US history. So it's doing really, really well. But it's just we never had a scenario where a highly sought-after console was readily available. So the weird thing with November might simply be that the demand was more front-loaded, and so now that's starting to simmer down. We'll see how that happens going into December. But, the thing with the US clearly is things are very expensive. Everything around us is expensive. People are starting to make serious concessions going into the holiday season, and even next year for insurance rates. I mean, it's all pretty grim. I mean, there's just bigger things going on. It's a US problem. And that's what's also noteworthy, is that in Europe, console sales look a lot different, where PS5 we're hearing is in the 2 million neighborhood on its own. So 1.6 in the US across everything, 2 million PS5 alone in Europe. So, I mean, it really depends on where we're talking about these things. And right now it's been really tough here. I mean, the average price for the consoles is as high as they've ever been. Let's get into some third-party news with this one about the Xbox Developer Direct, confirmed for January. So another one is happening very soon. This was confirmed from Matt Booty, Microsoft's head of game content and studios, when speaking with Variety. And they didn't really say exactly when, just that it will be next month. And we do know that Playground Games will be there, and they are working on Fable and Forza Horizon 6, so they might be showing off more of that. We're also waiting on more news for Gears of War E-Day, which that one does not have a PS5 version confirmed just yet, but there's that. There's also Halo Campaign Evolved. Avowed has no PS5 version. That one might be right around the corner. And of course, Starfield as well, which we are hearing from a recent Windows Central report that the next Starfield DLC was shown behind closed doors recently, and that did include a PS5 version. So that announcement could be very soon as well, which the ongoing rumor for that game was that it would not be shown off this year, but probably some big developer direct, which will be sometime early next year. So could be very early, which, Starfield, it is fascinating watching that game, just in that it most certainly did not land, I think, the way that people were hoping it would. But this update, some are thinking it's really big. Some are saying temper expectations. They're trying to really reduce the friction on the load times and the space travel, the sort of monotony of it. I mean, the game does load relatively fast in this current console cycle, but, there just is that friction of the travel and the monotony of it. So perhaps by the time it does get to PlayStation 5, it might be a much more enjoyable experience. Moving on to another big Gen AI controversy going on in the games business, and this time it's Larian that is at the center of all of it, the developer darling in recent years, and so that is what's going on. There's been a lot playing out here, so we'll try and recap the entire thing as best as we can in context to give you the full scoop on what is going on with this. So initially this happened with Jason Schreier from Bloomberg speaking with Larian's founder, CEO, and creative director Sven Vinke about the Divinity 3 announcement. And from what we learned is that they want to make the game in 3 to 4 years versus the 6 years from Baldur's Gate 3. They want to do an early access, but that probably won't be ready until next year. And the studio is more excited to do this game than continue working with Hasbro on a D&D based game. So there's the initial news from that story, but the controversy stems from Vinke's comments on generative AI, where he's been apparently pushing hard for it. But they made it clear there won't be any AI-generated content in Divinity. Everything is human actors, they're writing everything themselves, but the AI tools are for exploring ideas, fleshing out PowerPoints, and developing concept art and writing placeholder text. And while the initial report said that there was some pushback inside Larian, Vinke said that they think everyone at the company is more or less okay with how they're using it. Now, that article drew big headlines online and a lot of controversy. So hours later, Vinke responded on their personal X account saying they're not pushing hard to replace concept artists with AI, reiterating they have 72 artists, 23 of them being concept artists, and he explained that they use AI tools to explore references. He then links an article to an older GameSpot conversation about how machine learning can help automate tasks that no one wants to do. Adding on to this whole thing, Jason Schreier then shared a full transcript from his conversation so that people have the full context on what was said, which is a lot of what we heard. It's a tool they explore, but notably, the quote worth sharing here is where Vinke says, quote, "This is a tech-driven industry, so you try stuff. You can't afford not to try things, because if somebody finds the golden egg and you're not using it, you're dead in this industry." So this is kind of the same thing I tend to say on this topic, which is Gen AI, I don't like it. I don't want to say at all, but broadly speaking, if anything, I've had more disdain for it lately as the months go by, and it gets so much better at what it does, which is creating videos that make you second guess, was that even real? Same with the art, same with anything else. If it's creative, if it's something where, I've lately been having just more disdain for it, and so it does give me the ick. The thing is, you're simply naive to think that, it's not going to have some sort of place in the games business. It can be as pessimistic as saying these are public companies that are looking to save on labor or looking to find efficiencies in the business, and they are very motivated in a capitalistic environment to use it to the best of their ability. So there's always that, very pessimistic way to view it. But it's the matter of what do we advocate for safely? And that's why I always say I think it should be a safe extension of human work, where you're not getting rid of humans. And more importantly, this is obviously something I care a lot about, and I think many other people do on this controversy, is that you want the creative field to be preserved. You want the human touch. You want somebody to craft something, and that comes from, again, the human touch, the soul, what people are inspired by when they create. We want that stuff still to be present in our games. But how do you utilize AI in what is still, it's a very creative field, sure, but do you delegate it to certain tasks that are kind of the whole nobody wants to do this sort of thing? Or do you use it in an area that humans can't reasonably do, like quality assurance, to a degree that, again, you don't want to impede on entry-level jobs, very important there, but that Square story was, quite fascinating in that, well, for big open world games, I mean, you can't QA those things quite to the degree that you reasonably could if you just throw AI at it, right? So maybe the quality assurance job sort of changes in a way where it's still manpower, but it's manpower overseeing AI kind of do like very repetitious quality assurance tasks across the entire map or something, right? And these are just very open, loose examples that in theory make sense. I mean, on paper, it might be a lot different. So in the field, I think a lot of studios are doing just that. That's what the CEO is getting at. So, I mean, I think people tend to be very reactionary, and rightfully so. I mean, I think for some, there is the concern of, oh, this is a prolific studio that has really blown up in the past few years, and so there's a lot of eyes on them, and you don't want to hear them saying things like, we're pushing AI hard. Context is very important, and it sounds like they're navigating it in a way where that might make more sense, but it's arguably it's very tough. I have a lot of respect too for anybody that comes out like Bruce Straley recently and saying like, we don't want to use that at all. I think any sort of level of that just becomes very soulless, and so like that I can greatly appreciate. And I think that is maybe the novelty going into this sort of new era of video games that will use AI, and maybe they don't even have to disclose it anymore, right? Like that could also change too. If we get to that sort of area, there is a novelty to a studio saying we're not touching Gen AI at all, and maybe that would be something that becomes a trend, is that there's two angles of how a game is made and marketed. But there's also a wider audience at play here that just they're totally aloof to what's going on, right? There's still a core audience that pays attention to these things. And so that's the upsetting thing about Gen AI, is that it's all ready for memes and videos and art and these built-in generators on social media apps. Like, it's permeated. People really enjoy it and they don't mind it whatsoever. There's some people that don't advocate for this stuff whatsoever. So the environment's going to change very rapidly. It already is. And this is one of probably many more controversies coming in. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X. And if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. Follow the link down below or scan the QR code, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are some of the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, there was no videos because I am dead set focused on finishing 30 Platinums Part 4, which again should be live this Tuesday. That's the plan. If it doesn't show up, follow on Twitter. I'll keep you all posted on the progress, but it's going to be down to the wire for sure. So again, Tuesday, 30 Platinums Part 4. Should also be the extended cut. Any support does help a lot if you want to access that and all the bonus stuff I will do after the fact. And that is pretty much it. I think also Click R3, we're doing that this Sunday, so we had to push that a little bit further out, but that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.